Hello there, fellow warriors of the neurodivergent parenting realm. Welcome back to another episode of Chaos and Caffeine, where we juggle meltdowns, mischief, and the occasional moment of peace, all fueled by copious amounts of caffeine and a dash of dark humor. Today, we're diving deep into the science behind our kiddos' unique brain wiring with none other than Dr. Richard G. Boles. Now, before you start picturing a stuffy lab coat and incomprehensible jargon, let me reassure you, Dr. Boles is the real deal, and he's here to drop some serious knowledge bombs that'll make you rethink everything you thought you knew about neurodivergence. Dr. Boles is a triple board-certified medical geneticist with a resume that reads like a novel. He completed his medical degree at UCLA, followed by a pediatric residency at Harbor UCLA, and a genetics follow-up at Yale. For over 2 decades, he's been at the forefront of research into how our genes affect energy metabolism and, by extension, conditions like autism, ADHD, chronic fatigue, and so much more. But here's where things get a little personal. Dr. Boles isn't just about the science. He's about the solutions. He's the founder of NeuroNeeds, a company dedicated to creating nutritional products formulated to support individuals with neurodevelopmental and functional disorders. In this episode, we'll explore how mitochondrial dysfunction can play a role in our children's behaviors and what we, as parents, can do to support their unique needs. Dr. Boles will break down complex concepts into digestible insights, giving us tools to better understand and advocate for our kids. So grab that coffee or wine, absolute no judgment here, and let's get into it. Because parenting is hard, but understanding our children's needs shouldn't be a mystery. Let's unravel it all together with Dr. Boles. Dr. Boles, welcome to Chaos and Caffeine.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I am honored for you to be here. I will tell you, this is the first interview I've had on the podcast that makes me slightly nervous.
Oh, I'm a pretty easygoing guy.
Your resume reads like you were genetically engineered to help our neurodivergent families. And for those just meeting you, how did your journey into neurogenetics and mitochondrial medicine begin?
Well, I love kids. I have 4 of my own. That's part, but even I went to pediatrics before I had any kids. And then when I was doing pediatrics, I always really liked genetics. Even in junior high, I did a big project on DNA and everything. And it was something I was always interested in. I was am I going to do theoretical physics or am I going to do molecular biology, DNA? And I decided, well, the latter one is what I'll do. I thought that as an MD, I'd be able to help people more directly and it'd be something that I wanted to do. And so going into pediatrics and genetics just seemed to make sense. And when I was in genetics, I gravitated towards the inborn errors of metabolism because they're treatable. And there's a bunch of very rare disorders in that category. People might have heard about PKU or something like that, but there's many others in there. And we treat them with diet. You give a diet that has no phenylalanine, which is part of protein, and the people with PKU were normal, and otherwise beforehand they would have had epilepsy and autism and mental retardation. And so I really like that you could do something on a molecular level, on a very basic biochemical level to make a huge difference in somebody's life. But then as I started practicing, actually I noticed this on my very first patient. Most of the patients, we weren't making diagnoses. We would do our best. And I really think that my professors were good people that tried, but they were saying, oh, we can't help this. We don't know what this is. It would be ingenuitous for us to try to work this up because this is not what we do and we can't help them. And I'd see them over and over and over again. And many of them were neurodivergent. I'd say about half of them. The autism, ADHD, et cetera, the whole spectrum of that. They existed then, but not nearly as much as now. In other words, you saw them every once in a while. It wasn't every third patient you saw. The way that it is now. But it's a geneticist, I saw quite a few. And the other half were functional disease, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, chronic nausea and vomiting, chronic dizziness, et cetera, that they were being excluded. I tried to look into them as much as I could, and I found that they had mitochondrial issues. They didn't have mitochondrial disease. Well, a few of them did here and there, but most of them didn't have mitochondrial disease, but they had mitochondrial dysfunction. That means the mitochondria make the energy. In other words, their cells were not making energy correctly. They weren't making enough, or they were making too many pollutions, free radicals, et cetera. It's just the mitochondria weren't working right in energy metabolism. I started treating them with the same sort of dietary supplements and diets that we were using for inborn heirs. And back then, the mitochondrial cocktail was simply three things: riboflavin, coenzyme Q10, and carnitine. A long way we've gone since then. And we got better. I mean, it didn't cure anyone, but most of them got better. And most of the patients wanted to continue on that, despite going to an academic institution was not an easy thing to do. And so that became my life, really, basically, and that's what I ended up doing. I've seen patients with mitochondrial dysfunction. I mean, then we used to call it mitochondrial disease. Now we use mitochondrial disease when there is a DNA thing that causes the mitochondria to make less energy, and everyone else that has energy metabolism problems is mitochondrial dysfunction, which is a far, far larger group. And so I started collecting patients. People came to me with all of these things. So my practice now is the way that it was 20 years ago. Half of them are neurodivergent, and the other half are neurofunctional: pain, fatigue, vomiting, etc. And then my own son, who's brilliant, and but his ADHD got worse. I mean, diagnosed it when he was like 6 or 7, but it got to the point when he was in end of elementary school that he was doing really not so well. He was on multiple stimulants. It's not that I'm against medications, it's just that I think they cause a lot of side effects, and they're not as effective as I would like them to be. A lot of my patients are on them because they need them, but I prefer natural substances first. And he was on different supplements and everything. And it got to the point that his ADHD got so bad towards the beginning of high school that he either had to take the stimulant that day and not eat the whole day, or not take the stimulant and completely he couldn't understand a word they said in class. He was my ADHD boy. He was really fun to be around, but he wouldn't learn anything. And he would alternate between the days. And obviously that wasn't doing very well for his health, which was suffering. And it wasn't doing very well for his education, which was suffering. And I made it, I mean, we can talk about the products later or whatever. I don't want this to be commercial or whatever, but I made a product, a NeuroNeeds, for him that combined a bunch of stuff together. And he got off the stimulant. He even got off the other psychotropic, which I can't believe that he was able to. And he's off of all medications now, doing well in college, getting A's and B's. I mean, and so, I mean, much higher than I thought it was possible. So I'm a true believer in that ADHD is a major problem, and that it has a solution. I mean, it's the same solution. It's not for everyone, but I would strongly consider that people can think about dietary supplements, whether they're my brands or another brand. There are others out there. And you may not get the same response. I've had several other patients get this. Several of my patients have gotten similar responses. Not everyone gets the full, hugely better, but and many of them get off the medications, but not all of them. So anyway, that's my backstory.
Got you. I definitely want to talk about the supplements, but you said something in there that you are seeing ADHD and autism more prevalent now. May I ask, why do you think that is? Is it because it wasn't diagnosed back then, or we're just having more of it now?
Well, that is the $64,000 question,
Yeah.
something that shows I know, but that is I'll have to talk about autism at first, and then I'll try to bring that into ADHD.
Sure.
I know this is not an autism forum, but in autism, when I was in medical school, we were taught about this new disease that's fascinating, and you might see it once in your career. Okay. When I was a pediatrician at the beginning, we had some patients, but here and there, but it was still a rare disease. And now I mean, the CDC says it's now 1 in 31. That's 3% of people in the United States. In some parts of the country, it's higher. Obviously, some is less. But it's not just that. It's not that a very large proportion of my patients I'm seeing, and it's far, I mean, even as a pediatrician, I was seeing far more than that because they tend to have more medical problems than the average person. So you see them more than the incidents, of course. But the children of my friends, the children of my colleagues, it's like I'd say half of them have a child on the spectrum or with autism, not just ADHD. I think they all have a child with ADHD. I'm not kidding on that. I mean, but it's become much more common, and people will say, CDC says that it's become more visible. It's become more diagnosed. These were not autistic patients. We were called the old term mental retardation when I was a pediatrician. I mean, we're seeing the same patients now we were then, but far, far more than we were then. I'm a geneticist. My papers are mostly in the molecular genetics. I read the entire DNA sequence of my patients. I'm not kidding. Over 99% of the whole 3 billion nucleotides, 23,000 genes. It's amazing. This is the future. I really do it on all my patients on a clinical basis. I did 2 yesterday on 2 different patients. It's real. And I find that in autism that over 50% of them have a de novo mutation. That's just, de novo is just new in Latin. It's not in the mother, it's not in the father. We have their DNA. We looked at their entire DNA. It's a mutation which occurred in the formation of the sperm or the egg or the very, very early embryo. Most of them actually occur in this formation. The small mutations almost all occur in the formation of the sperm, and the large mutations almost always occur in the formation of the egg. So it's usually, and it could be decades before fertilization. Not something that happened during pregnancy or early life or anything. These are things that happened, in spermatogenesis or oogenesis, the formation of the sperm and the egg. And the good news is that a large part of them are in treatable pathways, and they line up with the treatments that a lot of autism doctors have been using. Autism doctors for a while have been like they go by different names, integrated or functional medicine or MAPS doctors or et cetera. I'm one of those that we use nutrition, we use other integrative methods and medications when we need to treat patients. And yeah, the good news is that a lot of these mutations are in treatable genes. But the bad news is where are these mutations coming from? Why are there so many kids having new mutations? We don't have DNA samples that we can pull out of the ground from a long time ago. So we don't know what the mutations were 30 years ago, 50 years ago, but I strongly suspect that these mutations didn't exist back then, not nearly as many as we're seeing now. And that the problem is, well, what causes mutations? Chemical mutagenesis is a major part of it. Everything from heavy metals to air pollution to plastics, you name it, many of these can affect the ability of the cell to maintain itself and promote mutations. They also affect the ability of the cell to maintain homeostasis in the presence of genetic defects. Let's face it, none of us have perfect genetics. None of us have a perfect environment. Cells maintain homeostasis as long as possible, and if they can't maintain homeostasis, then they fall apart, and it's actually rather dramatic when they do. So there's kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back type of thing, is that the cell will just keep maintaining it despite its genetic and its environmental problems until it can't. So if you have more mutations because of chemicals in the environment, and if you have a worse environment that's affecting normal mutations that would have been there before, plus additional mutations, I think that's really why autism is much more common. That our environment, what we've been doing to it. I've traveled around the world giving talks, mostly on autism. I talk about ADHD too, but I was recently in London and Macedonia and Serbia and India and Saudi Arabia and Dubai. Just Bahrain, some of the places I've been talking recently, and they all have the same problem. At some point, they realize that autism is everywhere and that their governments are now starting to make a priority of that. And they may be 10 or 15 years behind us, but they can see where we are and they can see their future because they industrialized a little later. But it's very scary. The mutations that the chemicals are making now could be affecting sperm and egg that are, 30 years from now could end up with an autistic child. So anyway, that is the
Mm.
autism connection. I see ADHD as autism light. I know that there's differences and they're defined differently. And basically, autism is when the parts of the brain that are involved in social communication aren't working as well. And ADHD is the parts of the executive function are not working as well. But the mutations affect neurons. Often they affect all cells, but the brain's more sensitive. If they affect neurons, you'd expect them to affect different parts of the brain. And so almost everyone, I won't say everyone, but in my experience, 80, 90% or so on the autistic spectrum have ADHD. A very large proportion of them also have anxiety disorder. Many of them have OCD-like problems. Many of them have intellectual disabilities. You can go on because if the neurons in one part of the brain are going to be affected, the neurons in another part of the brain are not necessarily, but likely to be affected. So while I don't have data on ADHD, I suspect that it's exactly the same, that it's new mutations from chemical mutagenesis and the effects of homeostasis that chemicals today are causing. So it's a combined effect on the two of them, and I suspect that's why we're seeing a lot more of it. Now, I know that ADHD is now something people have heard about, and people beforehand that just would have been, the type of kid that wants to go out there on the playground is now being labeled as ADHD. So there is definitely some of that. I'm not discounting that, but I mean, it doesn't, there is something biological going on as well.
So you do not have to comment on this if you do not want, but I recently listened to a podcast that really, really ticked me off. She was a licensed clinical social worker, and she said that we are causing our children's ADHD basically because we're separating from them before they are at the age of 3. So she was insinuating to me that because I sent my son to daycare, that's miraculously where his ADHD came from. She called it an inconvenient truth. She justified her inconvenient truth because she said that ADHD was not caused from one gene the way that autism was. Is that true?
Well, I don't believe that, and I can give you several different things. Number one is autism in many cases has a dominant gene, although there's hundreds of genes that are known that can be that. And quite frankly, every time I find a patient with a gene that mutation, it's usually one I haven't seen before. So I don't think I've crossed, even scraped the top of the barrel in terms of the autism genetics. There's probably thousands of genes that can relate to autism. It's polygenic. There are multiple genes inherited from the parents which act as modifiers, because otherwise it would be, okay, this affects the cell's homeostasis in general, or neuronal homeostasis, but why autism? Why ADHD? There are many other genes that modify the disease manifestation, and many of those modifying genes are actually where I find the best treatment. Sometimes the de novo mutation, which may be the most important part of the autism in that patient, but not the only by any means. It's not treatable, but I find 2 or 3 variants that are also in the patient that I can treat. I can't get half the straw off the camel's back, but I can get enough the camel can walk again. You don't need to find everything. You don't need to treat everything. You just need to find enough and treat enough. And it really does make a difference. So that's one thing I disagree on. Environment turns genes on and off. Genes do not cause disease. Genes cause risk. Some mutations may be 99% risk for disease. Some mutations may be 1%. Obviously, there are ones in between. So I'm not saying that the environment can't be an issue. I just don't think that that part of the environment is an issue. The scientific studies that have been done on autism have shown that there is a major part of environment, and most of it is prenatal or in the very, very early life. And not much of it is later on. So, I mean, there is some. And certainly the environment you have today will turn the genes on and off to affect the behavior and abilities of a child on the spectrum today. And so that's how we can treat it, because we can alter that environment, basically. Can't change the genes yet, despite what you're hearing in we just can't do that yet for polygenic disease. Monogenics, we can start to do. Polygenics, it's going to be a while. So, and yeah, no, I don't believe that. I don't know how I think there's some things in there you can use.
The crazy thing is, I was okay with me being the cause of my child's ADHD because of it's heritable, but I was drew the line when she said I did it because of daycare.
Well, I think that as adults, we all have to admit that we are all contributing to this environment and we all contribute to the genetics as our parents do to ours. And we just,
Yeah,
the blame is ours, regardless what we find. But I don't think the blame is there.
yeah. Looking for some new toys and tools that your ADHD kiddos will love? Play Therapy Supply has you covered with a great selection of toys, games, and fidgets that can be used by ADHD children, their parents, caregivers, and professionals alike. From fidget toys that help children calm down, de-stress, and focus, to social emotional learning resources to help kids understand their feelings and emotions, to games and activities designed to improve emotional regulation. Play Therapy Supply has it all. For thousands of items and fast and free shipping, visit playtherapysupply.com today. I accept that.
I say that the blame is ours because the solution has to be ours too. We have to get together to work on this because 1 in 31, when is it going to be 1 in 10 or 1 in 3?
Yeah. So I know you said that there is a lot you can do with diet. Does that apply to ADHD and autism as well?
Definitely. I mean, the neurodevelopmental, autism, ADHD, and the neurofunctional, like very pain, fatigue, nausea, and things like that, they're very amenable to diet. And I'll put diet into 2 categories, food and supplements. All right, and they're both important. There's a lot of good things in food we can't put in supplements because we don't know about them or they're not stable or they're too expensive to put in there. And of course, there's a lot of bad things in food. You can't get away with just eating a bunch of pills and having a bad diet. On the other hand, I can put something into a supplement at a dose that your child can eat the entire salad bar and then go next door and eat the entire salad bar and won't get there. Okay. I'm not in that regard treating a deficiency. I am trying to move the chemical reaction in the direction that towards healing. Basic chemistry, if you had A plus B goes to C plus D. If you add a whole bunch of A, the B goes away and you get a bunch of C and D. So I add a whole bunch of A and I want to get rid of the B, or I want C and D. I mean, I know I'm getting really technical on that, but the idea of giving the supplements is to give something beyond what you can do with diet. You can't do one without the other, and it makes a huge difference. And I mean, it really depends to a large degree on the molecular cause of autism, causes in that one individual. I do have many patients that their autism is completely gone and they're absolutely normal. They're off spectrum.
Wow.
It doesn't happen all the time, maybe 1 in 10. It's not like, on a blue moon. It happens, but not that often. I have a lot more patients that they had autism and they were doing very poorly. Now they have ADHD because the executive function is the hardest one to treat. And in many cases, they're doing okay in school on treatment, but they have an ADHD diagnosis. They no longer have an autism diagnosis. That's not that uncommon, but it's because I found the molecular cause, one of them, or some of the molecular causes, and I'm addressing those directly. Now, obviously, most people out there don't have the entire DNA sequence like my patients do, or have someone like me to go through the entire sequence. I go through it very, very carefully, and I find a lot of treatable things that weren't on the lab report. In fact, most treatable things weren't on the report. But there are particular pathways that I find over and over again in autistic children or children with ADHD, because it's really the same pathways, in my opinion. Ion channels, cation channelopathy, really big word there, but I hope people hear more about it. Ion salt, cations, positively charged salt, sodium, potassium, calcium. People have heard about that. Those are very important, particularly in the nervous system. The channel lets them in because they're positively charged. They can't cross the membrane. They have to be invited in. The channel has to open up. Think of the channel as a bouncer and the doorway into an exclusive nightclub. If it's a sodium nightclub, only sodium gets in, but the nightclub is filled, no more sodium gets in, the bouncer will keep them out. And if you're not sodium, you don't have a chance of getting in that nightclub. The problem is the bouncer then is distracted by somebody and the sodium's, maybe even something else, will squeeze by. Those are leaky channels. Leaky channels causes the cells to be positively charged inappropriately. Those cells are hyperactive. So what do hyperactive cells do? They cause autistic features. They cause distraction, ADHD, hyperactivity, anxiety. They can also cause, in some cases, migraine or epilepsy. They can cause pain, dizziness, fatigue, nausea. I can go on and on. Tinnitus, ringing in the ears. I mean, even things, people that see things that aren't there, and not that they see Uncle Charlie sitting in the chair, but they see a blob and they thought for someone was there for a moment and they look and they don't see something like that. Those sort of things can happen because the cells are sending false signals. I'm a pediatrician. I tell my patients the cells are lying, that there's nothing there. There's no damage there, but you feel pain, not because there's a psychiatric problem. It's in the nerves are sending the false signals. So that's a very common problem I see in kids that have neurological hyperactivity. I think some people in the audience will probably recognize their children and maybe themselves in the categories. Certainly explains more than half of my patients. Mitochondrial energy metabolism. I've been doing that for over 30 years, literally. If you don't have the energy to pump those cations back out, and that's a very energy deficient, energy requiring process, then they're just going to keep accumulating and the cells will be hyperactive. Think about a dam that's holding back the water. If there's a leak in a dam, for a while, you can handle it by having a pump. You're going to run out of electricity. You're going to have high electrical bills, but you can keep from a flood for a while. But what happens when it rains? So stress is going, it's like when it rains. So then you have a lot of cations going in there because the channels are opening a lot. The neurons are firing a lot. So you find a situation which is worse during stress. Of course, everyone says it's psychiatric. It's worse during stress and that it causes hyperactivity. But one question I get a lot is, how can it be hyperactivity okay, let me rephrase that. Okay, the question I get from a lot of mothers, they look at me and they think that I'm just full of it, right? Because I'm telling them the kid has too much. I'm telling them that the kid doesn't have enough energy when their kids are bouncing off the wall and they're full of energy. And I tell them about the toddler and the cookie jar. Okay, toddler says, I want a cookie. Mom says, no, I want a cookie. 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 Okay, that cookie is gone. Okay, the inhibitory nervous system is always on. It's always saying, no, don't fire. No, 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 no. The second it stops, the excitatory nervous system is going, I want that cookie. It fires. What's going to run out of energy first? The inhibitory nervous system. Most of the nerves in our brain, they're little ones, but most of them have like GABA and other inhibitory neurotransmitters. And when they run out of energy, then the brain gets hyperexcitable. And then what you get with that, you get autistic features, you get inattention, you get hyperactivity, and you can get pain, nausea, fatigue, dizziness, all of that stuff, migraine headache, etc., because of hyperactivity of various cells. Why are some cells more hyperactive than others? Well, that's because there's 3 billion nucleotides in their DNA, plus there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of environmental components. So it's complicated. So everyone's going to have a little bit different manifestation. Even different siblings with the same mutations are going to have, well, they don't have all the same because there's many different genes, but they're going to have different manifestations. So that's why your kid might be bouncing off the wall and hyperactive, and it's really an energy deficiency.
Interesting. So I got my hopes up there, but I don't think I should have. So because each child or each case is so individualized, there's no blanket remove red dyes or eat more protein that's going to help everyone.
That's a very good question. Let me go through one more pathway first. Okay.
Sure.
We've been talking about so far nerves firing within that nerve cell. It needs the cation channels open, and then the cations rush in, sodium, calcium, mostly. And it needs energy for this entire process, and particularly to reset it, to move the cations back out. But then the nerve gets to the synapse, right? The nerves are not connected completely. There's a synapse between it. There's positive neurotransmitters, excitatory, like glutamate, and there's inhibitory neurotransmitters like GABA. People are wondering, why are you mentioning these things? Because GABA agonists, that things that help GABA, can try to make the next cell less likely to fire. Glutamate antagonists, things that stop glutamate, will make the next cell less likely to fire. You want to help the no's and you want to stop the yeses. It's very simple. So there's many different things that we can do that are dietary, and some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are natural. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are dietary. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are natural. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are dietary. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are natural. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are dietary. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are natural. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are dietary. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are natural. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are dietary. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are natural. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are dietary. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are natural. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are dietary. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are natural. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are dietary. And some of them are pharmaceuticals, and some of them are natural. And some of them are pharmac that will help the inhibitory nerves, help the mom stand by the cookie jar, and decrease the excitatory nerves. Maybe give the kid a healthy snack so she's not hovering at the cookie jar in this metaphor. So there's also inflammation. A lot of doctors consider that that's really important. Inflammation is going to target cells and it's going to make them active because they have to heal themselves, and that's going to make cells hyperactive. It's more complicated than that, but that's the fourth treatable pathway that leads to cellular hyperexcitability. There's a lot of things that we can do to affect those four treatable pathways. Ion channels, energy, neurotransmission, inflammation. I give a lot of my patients potassium. I'm not necessarily saying everyone should be on prescription strength potassium, but about half of them or so have variants in genes that potassium will help. Well, it's a cation. Why should that help? It actually chases out the sodium and the calcium. It's more complicated than that, a lot more, but that's basically the idea. I give a lot of magnesium because magnesium is antagonistic or against calcium again. You think of good cations and bad cations. You don't want them in the cell. The cell's hyperactive. There are certainly the mitochondrial cocktail because you need the energy to pump the sodium and the calcium out of the cell. And antioxidants often is part of the good mitochondrial cocktail because the mitochondria is working full speed to pump everything out. So it's making a lot of pollution. If the cell doesn't have enough energy, what it will do is it will make more mitochondria or larger mitochondria. So we call it mitochondrial proliferation. I see that in most of my patients. I actually do a test called mitoswab and find that. And the mitochondrial proliferation means that they have more energy, but they also are making more pollution. Think about a car. You have to pull a trailer on a freeway up a hill. If it's going to make a lot of pollution. The way to get that car up that hill is to then put another engine in it, exactly the same engine. You'll have more energy, but it'll have a lot more pollution. So that's really what's happening. Mitochondrial proliferation gives you the energy that you need, but it's also producing a lot of free radicals, reactive oxygen species, et cetera. That damages cells, damages DNA, protein, everything, and that brings in the immune system, which then causes hyperactivity again, as well as feelings of not feeling well, because when you're sick, you have inflammation and you don't feel well. So these are the treatable pathways, and that's some of the things that they're inhibitory neurotransmitters. We want to help them. Magnesium can do that. Zinc can do that. There are some drugs for that as well. Excitatory neurotransmitters, we want to hinder them. Again, magnesium and zinc, but there are some drugs as well. We can also help the inhibitory neurotransmitters with GABA itself, or L-theanine, which is in tea. It makes it soothing. That helps GABA. 5-hydroxytryptophan makes serotonin. I didn't speak about that. That's mostly an inhibitory neurotransmitter. That also helps. So there are a lot, and then of course there are anti-inflammatory agents, and there's many of those. Some of them are non-prescription, like omega-3s. That's actually the omega-3 is what the omega needs I was talking about with my son before, is that you want to get the omega-3s into the brain, so you need the krill oil that gets it across the blood-brain barrier because the fish oil cannot get across the blood-brain barrier. It needs to be converted by the liver. The liver only converts a little bit. So if you want to get a lot of good omega-3s into the brain, you need to use the krill oil to get it across the blood-brain barrier.
Interesting.
There's many other anti-inflammatory agents. So to get back to answer your question, what can you do? There are many things that can be done that work on the treatable channels. That can work on mitochondrial energy metabolism, work on neurotransmission, and that work on inflammation. And obviously, I'm not recommending that everyone go down to the store and go to the vitamin aisle and buy 50 different things. It's going to take a clinician. Many are physicians, but sometimes nurse practitioners and others, to a dietitian, to go through this and say, these are the type of problems that are an issue in your child, and that these are the pathways that we suspect are likely to be a problem in your child, and these are the dietary supplements that are possibly going to help, and to go over the pros and cons. and then work on that a while. And then if the dietary supplements are working great, then that's perfect. But if you need additional help, then to think about what medications might be helpful and which supplements work can help you to know, well, let's use a medication to really push that same pathway that supplement worked. Of course, you can take my way and have the whole DNA thing read as well, but I mean, not everyone can do that. So that is, but your question is, what can you do without the DNA? Certainly, you can have somebody that can help on that regard. So there are physicians out there that do treat autism or ADHD or chronic pain or fatigue or any of these problems. You want to look for, again, a functional medicine provider. And they go by different names again.
And they're looking for deficiencies?
Well, you are looking for, I mean, there are a lot of times people have magnesium deficiency. That in the first world, almost everyone is magnesium deficient and vitamin D deficient because of the factory farming. And they're mostly deficient from omega-3 fatty acids as well. So there is some of that, there's no doubt. But it's also using supplements as targeted to push metabolic pathways in the direction of healing.
Got you.
Like, for instance, in neurotransmitter, the situation, you have a kid with ADHD that's really hyperactive and totally inattentive because every little thing distracts him. It could be a girl too, but boys are a little bit more affected. And so you want to use things that help the inhibitory neurotransmitters, like L-theanine or GABA or 5-hydroxytryptophan, magnesium, zinc. And then you want to also do things that decrease the excitatory neurotransmitters, which overlap to some degree, magnesium and zinc. So those could be things that could be done in that situation. And again, just don't take my advice and go out there and do things. Talk to your provider, because your child is a unique, or you are a unique individual with your own issues, your own symptoms, your own biochemistry, your own genetics, your own environmental factors. And one size does not fit all by any means.
You said something really important in there when you said that most supplements are using fish oil, which can't penetrate the barrier, as to where I've heard it say most supplements don't have a high enough omega count. So really, they're just using the wrong type. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, there's the right type of omega and there's the amount of omega. The quality and quantity is important. If you are a physician treating people in middle age and you want to give them omegas for good general health, good cardiac health, and you're also interested in hair, skin, nails, blood pressure, blood sugar, and things, high dose fish oil is what you want, because that will help those systems, and you need it to be really at high dose to get to the heart. To be able to state on the label that it has cardiac benefits, it has to have more than 800 milligrams of omega-3s in it per day. So that's sort of the cutoff that they use. That's a lot. If you were going to take 800 milligrams in krill oil, that would be incredibly expensive. So why krill oil? Because fish oil is triglyceride bound. I'm getting into the weeds here, but the fish oil cannot go across the blood-brain barrier. It has to be converted to a phospholipid form by the liver. The liver will do that. That's not a problem, but the liver can only do a little bit of that. If you want to get a lot of omega-3s into the brain to fix a problem there, you can't use fish oil, because after a little bit, you're way oversaturated. Krill oil is phosphatidylcholine bound, and that will go directly across the blood-brain barrier. So if you put krill oil in, and the doses are less, but you do get far more into the brain than you would if you were using a high-dose fish oil. So that's why. You're also getting phosphatidylcholine into the brain, which is good because PC, which is what we call it, is good for brain. And you're also getting choline into brain. Acetylcholine is one of the major neurotransmitters. One of the other ones we didn't talk about. But there's phosphatidylserine, which the brain needs too, and that comes from plants. So in the omega needs that help so well with my son and with so many of my patients, it is high dose fish oil, because that's important. Plus moderate dose krill oil to get a lot of it into brain, plus phosphatidylserine that's been derived from sunflower seeds. So I add the three of them together. Krill also has other benefits. It has astaxanthin in it, which is a really good antioxidant, which works from to help as an antioxidant for reactive oxygen species as well.
So your story about your son hits So close to home for me because my son is on a stimulant medication Monday through Friday, and from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., he does not eat. So I would love for you to tell us all about not only omega needs, but I know you have many other supplements that have are covered up all over the internet with 5-star reviews and amazing testimonials.
Well, their spectrum needs and energy needs, you can think of as being very similar. Okay, spectrum needs is marketed towards the autism community, but a lot of people in chronic fatigue will use it because they prefer a powder form. Spectrum needs its 33 active ingredients as a powder form. It has a lemon flavor and a berry flavor, and you can mix it in any liquid to any degree. A lot of people do ice water, so you can put smoothie, or you can put even in chocolate syrup if the kid is really picky. That will help. Enough chocolate syrup. And chocolate has a lot of antioxidants in it. Flavonoids in chocolate are great antioxidants. It is a no guilt flavor.
Thank you for
Okay,
that.
so anyway, can't emphasize that enough. Okay, so spectrum needs is often for the little kids, and that could be ADHD, it could be chronic fatigue, it could be anything like that. When they get to around 10 or 12 years of age, I try to graduate my patients over to energy needs from spectrum needs. Energy needs is pretty much the same thing. It's in a capsule form because it's easier to take the capsules and to mix the powder. They don't want the baby powder anymore. So energy needs is called that because it was marketed for like in adults with chronic fatigue syndrome, which is really a major problem. And it actually works very well in that. 40 active ingredients. I did add a few extra things in it. There are a couple more things, like there's less B vitamins. The little kids, the B vitamins really help them to talk. If you give them huge amount, like the 5-year-olds, then they start talking and the huge B vitamins. So I put those in spectrum needs. Well, they're moderate amounts of B vitamins in the energy needs because the teenagers and the adults, that much B vitamins makes them feel a little jittery. Of course, you can always use the other product, but and people go back and forth. My mother, who's 90, likes spectrum needs. She likes the powder. I have her on energy need. I'm sorry, I have her on active needs now, but we'll go over that. And then there are some families that prefer to flavor it themselves. Kids really picky, so they take the energy needs, they open the capsules, and they flavor it with chocolate or whatever they want because they don't want the berry or the lemon flavor. So you can do either way. So that is the baseline. That is the mitochondrial cocktail, full vitamin, multivitamin, and mineral. It includes a lot of things that are vitamins that we don't think of as vitamins, like choline and inositol, and things that we don't think of as minerals, like molybdenum or boron. These are, they are vitamins and minerals that we need, but they're almost never in an over-the-counter preparation that you would get a multivitamin. So, by the way, these are all over the counter that NeuroNeeds sells, but I'm talking about just a standard multivitamin. You won't find those sort of things in it. So it is a multivitamin, mineral plus the mitochondrial cocktail, a lot of antioxidants. That's what's in that. The two things that are missing in that, because it's a powder, it's either a powder that you mix with liquid or it's a powder in a capsule form. It doesn't mix with things that are really heavily oil because the water and the oil don't mix. They're not absorbed that way by our intestines. I tried to put it in a powder form. It doesn't work. My patients, the blood levels are not high enough. I wanted one thing that you can buy, so I had to put the coenzyme Q10 as separate. I call that Q needs, but there are other brands. Unfortunately, over 90% of what's in the store is useless, a coenzyme Q10. The bioavailability of ubiquinone, the major one, is very poor. It doesn't usually say that, it just says CoQ. If it's ubiquinol, the better form, it will say that all over because it's more expensive. So instead of a $20 bottle, it's a $40 bottle. No one will buy a $40 bottle at CVS Pharmacy. So that's why you don't find them there. But it's 5 times more bioavailable. So it needs 1/5 the dose to get the same blood level. So it's actually much cheaper, but they won't sell them because no one will buy them. Within ubiquinols, there are some brands are better than others. And a lot of my patients were having trouble with that, getting the right brand. So I private label the Konica brand, which I found the highest blood levels in my patients in. And so we call that Q needs, but there are other brands for that too. So I do recommend what I call the brain bundle. That's either Spectrum needs if you can't swallow, energy needs if you can swallow. Well, you can go back and forth on that. Plus the Q needs and the omega needs because source in an oil and they can't go with it. So that's what I call the brain bundle. And I do recommend that for anyone with significant neurodevelopmental disease, autism, significant ADHD, epilepsy, etc. Again, talk to your physician, and just don't take anything and take without speaking to your provider, but regardless of what it is that you get. We have another product because a lot of my families were saying, okay, my boy, it makes sense to pay that much and to take all of those capsules or because he really needs it. But my daughter just has a little ADHD, or maybe even doesn't have the diagnosis, but she's having a little bit of problem now that she's in high school. Or my husband, he's at a desk 8 hours a day, and that's not really a normal physiological condition. He doesn't have a disease, but he's just, it's hard for him to do that. What one product can I do that can help with that? I didn't have one, so we made one. Again, we have the problem that you have things in oils and things in water that you can't mix them together. ADHD, people have executive problems. They just want to buy one thing. So it's a box called Focus Needs, and it has two different containers in that box. One of that is exactly the same as omega needs. That's your omega-3. And the other one are vitamins. It's not the same as energy needs capsules, but it's a step down. I think of it as 70% of the bang for 30% of the buck, or something like that. In families that have somebody that just want better focus, or that they have really mild ADHD, you can save money and it makes it a lot easier with focus needs because you're taking less capsules. I took the most important things and put it into fewer capsules. So you don't have the whole everything's in it, just a few, just the most important ones. So that's another option. But I wouldn't do that for people who are really, that are on medications and struggling and everything. I would recommend the brain bundle, and then if this appears to be the right thing to do and your provider agrees, then start weaning the psychotropics, the amphetamines, et cetera, if that is indeed the right thing to do. I have another product that I'm very happy about. I made this for me. I have to admit, I was completely selfish. I made all these other products for everyone else, but I'm getting to a certain age, and I'm with 4 kids and with 3 jobs and flying all over the place and seeing patients and things like that. I'm 64. I felt, I hate feeling my age. So I made Active Needs. Active Needs is energy needs plus 15 additional ingredients. So it's everything in energy needs. But the 15 ingredients are a lot of citrulline and arginine to open up the blood vessels, to help with your exercise and with recovery, to get to the increase to the brain and to the heart and everything, to try to what that does is it increases nitric oxide synthase. Nitric oxide dilates the blood vessels. A lot of cardiologists are now recommending those to try in their middle-aged patients to try to help with their general health and to decrease the chance of cardiovascular disease, but it's also great for exercise tolerance. There's also a lot of nootropics in it that help the brain to think a little bit better, the type of things that law students would take. There's other things that will help exercise. It's all legal doping. You can do this and go for the Olympics or anything. There's just vitamins and minerals. Plus, there's some herbs in it. And the herbs are ones that have been used by ancient China and India, that if you go to a provider in those situations and you say, I'm middle-aged now and I'm feeling my age, and they'll say, oh, I have some herbs that will pick you up. So I put those in there. And there's a bunch of things that have been found by modern medicine to slow down the aging process, like nicotinamide riboside and resveratrol. And there are others in there. I put those in there as well. So it's to try to, it's, my answer to the fact that I'm getting older and I have to slow down. Nope, I'm going to make Active Needs and keep on going. Honestly, I hope 20, 30 years younger on it. But if you doubt me, try it.
Dr. Boles, I know you selfishly made that for you, but I think the true testimonial is your 90-year-old mother enjoying it and still switching back between the two.
Oh yeah, I was at a conference in London and she was like, I ran out. You have to give it to me. She's really nice. I love her and everything like that, but she was not happy about the fact she ran out.
Dr. Bowles, I hear lately there is actually proof that your products work, and I would love to hear about that.
Oh, I'm very happy to tell you about that because for 30 years I've been doing this, but it's been what we call anecdotal. I mean, my clinical assessment is that they got better. A lot of the families are still ordering, and for 30 years I've been doing this, but we haven't had the proof. We had private funding for this. It was a study done at Phoenix Children's Hospital. Dr. Richard Fry was the principal investigator. Because I have I'm part of NeuroNeeds. I have a conflict of interest. I was hands off. I occasionally gave advice. He often disregarded it, and so that's the way that it should be.
Yeah.
Dr. Fry and I wanted it to be the study that we wanted to read that other people would do, that we would make decisions on our patients. So it was double blind. Nobody knew what they were getting. It was placebo controlled. We had to make placebos that looked, tasted, and smelled like the real thing. It's harder than you think.
Yeah.
Okay. We went for a lot of ones before we got one. And it was crossover. Everyone got real product, everyone got placebo. It's just you didn't know which one was which. Half the people got the real product first, and then they went to the placebo. Half got placebo first, and then they got to the real product. Nobody knew except for the person in the pharmacy who was handing it out. We didn't know when we did the data analysis or anything. So the spectrum needs plus Q needs together in children 3 to 17, all with a diagnosis of autism. It helped their mitochondrial function. It actually normalized it by mitoswab and by seahorse, which is the gold standard.
Wow.
It showed that their mitochondria got significantly better on the real supplement, but on the placebo, it actually got a little worse. But I mean, it didn't change at all. Maybe the disease is kind of getting worse over time or something. And this is going to be a little complex, but it is the RC, or the reserve capacity, is what improved dramatically. That's the ability of the mitochondria to make more energy when it needs to when it's under stress. Like if you have a viral infection or anesthesia or you break a leg or something, a lot of kids on the spectrum start having deteriorations at that point, and you need that reserve capacity. And it improved that quite a bit. And I'm seeing that people that are on the products, they don't have deteriorations anymore. They don't have loss of milestones if they're
Wow.
actually taking the right dose. Maybe I'm completely lucky or something, but I've never had a significant deterioration on treatment ever.
Wow.
But when people went off of treatment several times, and that's very sad. But anyway, but people want to hear about what it really did for them. There are three core autism areas: socialization, communication, and repetitive behavior. All three of them significantly improved.
Wow.
Not just that they got better by statistically significant, but they actually had moderate improvement areas that were clinically important. And parental stress went down. All of that happened on the supplement, and on the placebos, they were the same, or they actually got a tiny bit worse. So it
Wow.
was, again, I think our patients were kind of, getting worse at that point, and that it stopped it. So it really did make a difference in those patients. The only drawback is it was only 16. You can only do so much on private money. And that's a really important thing here, is that if you make a drug, you can find drug companies and investors that will pay for it because there's maybe a 1 in 100 chance it'll actually get to market and it'll make $1 billion. So they're going to put their money on the roulette wheel because you can patent it. With a natural substance like everything that I make, you can't patent what's in nature. They're not going to put a dime on it because as soon as they put their money on it, someone else will make it for cheaper. So that's why all of these supplements are not tested. 99.9% of the supplements that are sold in the store, no one went through a test, but we did. It's small, yes, but we did do it. And we're going to find out in a month what our scores were. We applied for a federal grant to, instead of doing 16 patients, to do 120 patients.
Oh, wow.
We really believe that it's going to work. And we're putting our reputation on the line to prove it.
That is
So I'm very
fascinating.
happy to say about that.
Yeah.
I'm a scientist as well as a doctor. I want to make sure. I just don't want to say something because I think it works. I want it to work. And now, we finally, we're very thankful to the Brain Foundation that put down the money to be able to put that. and to Dr. Fry and all of the patients that were involved in the study. But we got some
Absolutely.
good data.
That is incredible. I'm wondering if any of the patients could tell when they were getting NeuroNeeds and when they weren't.
Well, that's always the problem is if it really, really works, you can't tell. But
Hmm.
if it really, really works, it really, really works. So it doesn't matter that they could tell.
True.
I mean,
That's very
that is
true.
the problem in any study. Yes.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't work, you can't tell, and then it will fail. So yes, with that caveat, that could be an issue. Most physicians will not recommend anything that's not FDA approved. And there's good reasons for that. First of all, they feel that that will tell them that it really works. And they're not just trying something that is not likely to work or it might be harmful. It's also because insurance companies will pay for it. And most people have an insurance model. I know a lot of good doctors that have an insurance model. They don't want to have a two-tier system. For some people that have money, get a better care. They want to give the same care to everyone, so everything has to be paid for. The problem with that is that the FDA will only approve it if there's a large study, and a large study costs millions of dollars. So wish me luck that the federal grant is paid for, because that is $2 million study to do it right. So the FDA will hopefully approve it.
I wish you all the luck. I think this is so important. Anything else that we need to add in there?
Well, I just think that I didn't state this directly, but I've inferred it, is that the system is biased against nutrition because nutrition can't get a patent and no one's going to spend the millions of dollars to do the study. And without the millions of dollars, you don't have FDA approval. Insurance companies and government payers are not going to pay, and doctors are not going to recommend it. What do? They recommend drugs.
Yeah.
I don't think most of these are bad doctors that are pushing drug company because they have secondary gain or something. I think they're trying to do the best for all their patients.
Yeah,
It's just the system is against us.
for sure. Dr. Bowles, I thought this interview would go completely over my head, but you made so much sense, and I think it really just hits home for me because our son's stories are so similar. And I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, you're welcome very much. I hope that this helps somebody.
Yes, I always ask my guests to leave struggling neurodivergent parents with one tip that they could give, and it usually is very selfishly for me. So if you have one, I would love for you to leave it.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of naysayers on there that will say that you can't treat these or that you have to use drugs. And they actually are mostly good people that really believe that.
Mm.
But there are a lot of people out there that say that these are treatable and you don't necessarily need to use drugs. Seek them out.
I love that because around 85% of my audience are searching for the steps to take before medication. So I think this episode will really hit home for them.
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I'm sure that somewhere in this podcast is the point that I'm not anti-medication. Some people absolutely need it. It's just that if you can do something natural first, great. And if you can do something natural that reduces the dose of the medication, that's great too.
Absolutely. As always, I will link NeuroNeeds in the show notes so that people can find you and study upon you. I have poured over the website. You are an incredible individual, and I really wish we could clone you to spread all over the globe. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, bye.
Phew, mama. If your brain is doing cartwheels right now, you're not alone. Mine just did the parenting equivalent of a marathon while holding a toddler, 3 laundry baskets, and an emotional support latte. Dr. Boles just gave us a masterclass in the biology behind our beautifully complex, gloriously wired neurodivergent kiddos. And I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a little more equipped, a little more empowered, and a lot more seen. Let's be real, it's easy to feel like we're failing when traditional parenting advice doesn't work. But Dr. Bowles reminded us that there's actual science, real cellular level science, that explains why our children experience the world the way they do. There are things we can do to support them, from nutrition to targeted supplements to being the fierce, informed mama bears we were always meant to be. That's it for this episode of Chaos and Caffeine. I'm Danielle Kelly, your non-judgmental neurodivergent parenting bestie. Be sure to check out all of Dr. Bowles' links, which will be in the show notes, and stay tuned for future episodes where we'll be doing giveaways of NeuroNeeds products. Bye, y'all.